Minutes ago, a violent magnitude 7.6 earthquake tore through northern Japan, shaking millions from their beds and triggering tsunami warnings for waves up to 10 feet. Power grids failed, trains halted, and entire communities raced for higher ground. Many are in towns still haunted by the devastation of 2011. Nuclear plants now stand on high alert. How did this crisis unfold so quickly, and which warning signs went unseen until it was almost too late? At 11:15 p.m. local time, seismic alarms across northern Japan registered a magnitude 7.6 earthquake off the Aomori coast. The epicenter lay 80 kilometers offshore, beneath the cold waters of the Pacific, at a depth of about 50 kilometers. In the moments that followed, the ground convulsed with a force measured as upper 6 on Japan's seismic intensity scale, a level where standing becomes impossible and even crawling is a struggle. For 30 seconds, entire cities across Aomori, Iwate, and southern Hokkaido endured violent shaking. Furniture toppled, windows shattered, and power lines swayed as buildings groaned under the stress. The Japan Meteorological Agency's intensity chart painted a stark picture. Coastal areas of Aomori and northern Iwate hit the highest registered intensities, with southern Hokkaido not far behind. According to the USGS, about 303,000 people experienced very strong shaking, with another 1.29 million exposed to strong tremors. 6 million more felt moderate movement, enough to wake families and send them scrambling for emergency kits. In hotel corridors in Hachinohe, guests clung to the walls to keep their balance. In schools and hospitals, emergency lights flickered to life as backup generators kicked in. Duty seismologists at the USGS and the JMA tracked the rupture's signature across a web of sensors, confirming the event as a classic subduction zone quake, powerful, deep, and capable of sending shockwaves far inland. Within minutes, a magnitude 5.5 aftershock rattled the region, compounding the confusion. The initial quake's duration, 30 seconds of relentless acceleration, meant not just brief jolts, but a sustained assault on infrastructure. Lifelines like the Tohoku Shinkansen and local rail lines ground to a halt. Power outages swept across parts of Hokkaido and Tohoku. For many, the memory of 2011 returned instantly, triggered by the unmistakable violence of the shaking and the sharp metallic whine of emergency sirens. The intensity scale used by the JMA is not a simple measure of energy released, but a direct translation of what people feel and what buildings endure. At upper 6, unreinforced walls can collapse, landslides become likely, and the risk of secondary disasters, fire, gas leaks, and structural failure rises sharply. The quake's offshore depth limited some of the shaking's destructiveness, but the size and location left no doubt. This was an event with the power to test every layer of Japan's disaster defenses. At 11:30 p.m., just 15 minutes after the quake, the Japan Meteorological Agency issued a tsunami warning for the Pacific coasts of Hokkaido, Aomori, and Iwate. Their bulletin carried a stark message: waves up to 3 meters could strike. The wording left no room for doubt. Evacuate immediately. Sirens began to sound across the dark coast, and officials warned that the first waves might reach land within 20 minutes. The warning extended south with advisories for Miyagi and Fukushima. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center echoed the alert, warning that hazardous waves were possible within 1,000 kilometers of the epicenter. Russia's Far East was put on watch as well. Tide gauge stations along the coast registered the first changes in sea level. At Urakawa in Hokkaido, the gauge needle edged upward at 11:40 p.m., and it recorded a 45-centimeter surge 8 minutes later. Mutsu Ogawara in Aomori saw its first tsunami at 11:42 p.m., peaking at 52 centimeters. Kuji in Iwate followed at 11:45 p.m., reaching 50 centimeters. The pattern repeated at Hachinohe and Kamishi. Each port saw the sea rise by about half a meter, the water oscillating in 10 to 15-minute intervals. JM. A tide gauge sheets showed the data in stark lines, wave after wave, none breaching the 1-meter mark, but each enough to unsettle anyone watching the coast. Yet even as these first surges arrived, the warning remained. The JMA Tsunami Unit, working through the night, cautioned that the initial waves might not be the largest. Their bulletins reminded the public that subsequent surges could be stronger, and that strong currents could persist for hours. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center reinforced the message, noting that tsunami wave heights are notoriously unpredictable and can vary sharply from one bay to the next. Harbor resonance, underwater topography, and the precise rupture of the fault all play a role, making early forecasts intentionally conservative. In the aftermath of 2011, officials refused to take chances. The memory of underestimated waves and late-arriving surges weighed on every decision. For those in the warning zones, the gap between forecast and observation created a tense uncertainty. The official guidance was clear: do not return to low-lying areas until the warning is lifted. Even with observed waves under a meter, the possibility of a larger surge kept thousands away from the shoreline. In these hours, the science of tsunami forecasting collided with the reality of imperfect information. The hazard was not over. The waiting had only begun. Sirens wailed along the coast as evacuation orders echoed through loudspeakers and mobile alerts. In towns like Kuji, Mutsu, and Urakawa, families grabbed flashlights, blankets, and whatever essentials they could carry. Streets filled with headlights as cars crept uphill, taillights flickering in the darkness. On foot, elderly residents leaned on neighbors or hurried with children in tow, all moving with the same urgency toward higher ground. Municipal officials, some still in uniforms from the day's work, stood at intersections guiding traffic and urging people to keep moving. School gymnasiums and community centers unlocked doors. Volunteers raced to lay out mats and distribute water. Evacuation was not a drill. For many, the memory of March 2011 had never faded. Some evacuees had rebuilt homes just a few kilometers from the sea, only to find themselves retracing the same routes to safety 14 years later. In Hachinohe, a mother steered her 2 sons toward the nearest shelter, recalling the night she fled as a teenager. In Iwate, a fisherman paused on the seawall, scanning the black horizon for signs of incoming waves before joining the flow inland. Local governments acted quickly, activating disaster response teams and broadcasting updates every few minutes. The chief cabinet secretary issued an urgent message: evacuate immediately, do not wait for the first wave. It left little room for hesitation. In Aomori, more than 15,000 people left their homes in the first hour. Iwate saw 12,000 more on the move, while Hokkaido's Pacific coast towns emptied out as well. Inside shelters, the mood was tense. Some people huddled around radios waiting for news on the tsunami's height. Others exchanged quiet words, faces drawn with anxiety and exhaustion. Volunteers handed out blankets and hot drinks, but the uncertainty pressed on everyone. No one knew if their homes would still be standing by sunrise. The trauma of the past lingered in every hurried step and every anxious glance toward the coast as the night stretched on and the warnings remained in place. Rail operators scrambled to assess damage, even as the ground was still quivering from aftershocks. East Japan Railway, JR East, suspended the Tohoku Shinkansen between Fukushima and Shin Aomori, halting one of the country's busiest high-speed corridors in the middle of the night. Local lines across Aomori, Iwate, and southern Hokkaido stopped running as well, their safety systems triggered by seismic sensors. Station platforms emptied in moments, leaving travelers stranded in cities and rural towns alike. Commuter trains sat motionless on tracks, their headlights cutting through darkness as crews waited for the all-clear to check for buckled rails and fallen debris. Utilities faced their own crisis. In the hours after the quake, about 900 homes across Hokkaido and the Tohoku region lost electricity. Automatic shutdowns isolated damaged circuits to prevent fires, but the outages left neighborhoods in total darkness. Emergency power lines hummed to life at hospitals and shelters, while utility crews mobilized to inspect substations and transmission towers. For many, the only light came from battery-powered lanterns and the blue glow of mobile phones. The sudden loss of power complicated evacuation efforts, with traffic signals out and elevators stalled mid-floor. In Hachinohe, first responders rushed to a hotel where several people had been injured by falling objects and shattered glass. Fire department reports tallied non-life-threatening injuries, but warned that aftershocks could still bring down weakened structures. Throughout the region, calls poured into emergency centers about broken water mains, gas leaks, and damaged roads. The strain on essential services exposed vulnerabilities that linger even after years of disaster planning and infrastructure upgrades. Transport and lifeline disruptions carried a special weight for nuclear safety teams. Backup generators at critical facilities switched on automatically, ensuring that cooling systems and safety controls would continue operating even if grid power failed. At the same time, plant operators and regulators monitored for any sign of cascading failures, a lesson burned into memory by the events of 2011. Every outage, every stalled train, every flicker of emergency lighting became another variable in the delicate balance of disaster response. In these first hours, the country's most advanced systems were forced to prove their resilience under real-world stress. Inside the control rooms of northern Japan's nuclear plants, emergency protocols snapped into action the moment the shaking stopped. At Higashidori, operators ran through post-quake inspection checklists, confirming the status of spent fuel pools, backup power, and radiation monitors. The plant, dormant since the Fukushima disaster, still holds nuclear fuel on site. By the time tsunami gauges along the Aomori coast registered the first surges, both Tohoku Electric and the Nuclear Regulation Authority were reporting to local media. No signs of coolant loss, no abnormal radiation, no visible structural damage. Inspections would continue through the night, but the initial sweep found nothing out of order. At Onagawa in Miyagi Prefecture, engineers fanned out through the reactor buildings, guided by routines honed in the years since 2011. The plant's main structures stand about 15 meters above sea level, shielded by a seawall of similar height, one of the tallest in Japan. In 2011, this barrier kept the site dry even as waves climbed to 13 meters just beyond the gate. Tonight, Tohoku Electric reported that the seawall remained intact, with no overtopping. Early checks showed normal readings on all radiation monitors and no sign of damage to cooling systems. The plant's reactors have been offline for years, but the inspection drill remained the same: walkdowns, instrument checks, and hourly updates sent to regulators and local governments. Farther north, Tamari Nuclear Power Station on Hokkaido's coast entered its own post-quake routine. The site, built on a platform roughly 15 meters above sea level, has seen years of upgrades since Fukushima, reinforced seawalls, waterproofed backup generators, and additional mobile power sources. Hokkaido Electric confirmed to the Nuclear Regulation Authority that no reactors were operational at the time of the quake, and that cooling of spent fuel continued without interruption. Radiation monitors at the plant boundary and in surrounding neighborhoods showed no change from background levels. Engineers moved through the site, checking for leaks, cracks, or equipment shifts as aftershocks continued to rattle the region. In public briefings carried by Japanese broadcasters, regulators repeated the essential message: all nuclear facilities in the affected region were under close watch, and no abnormalities had been detected so far. Operators stressed that inspections would continue, with results reported to local authorities and the national regulator as the night wore on. The language was careful, almost ritualistic. No impact on safety-critical systems, no changes in monitoring data. The process was transparent: every plant, every sensor, every backup system under scrutiny, as the country waited for the all-clear. No update came from Rokusho. As the hours passed, Japan Nuclear Fuel's sprawling reprocessing complex remained silent, with no public statement on its status. The plant, built to handle spent nuclear fuel and plutonium, sits just inland from the Aomori coast, well inside the official tsunami warning zone. Its silence drew attention from regulators and watchdogs alike. While the Nuclear Regulation Authority logged repeated requests for information, the facility's operators offered no immediate details about power supply, cooling systems, or radiation monitors. Local officials in Aomori confirmed only that they were awaiting word, and that standard off-site monitoring posts showed no abnormal readings. This absence stands out in a country where the lessons of 2011 are never far from mind. 14 years ago, the tsunami overwhelmed Fukushima Daiichi's seawall, flooding backup generators and plunging 3 reactors into blackout. The result was core meltdowns, hydrogen explosions, and the largest release of radioactive material since Chernobyl. Nearly 20,000 people died in the disaster. Entire towns were abandoned. Even today, more than 1 million tons of treated water, filtered but still containing tritium, are being released from Fukushima's tanks into the Pacific under IAEA supervision. The cleanup, once promised within 3 decades, is now expected to stretch well beyond 30 or 40 years. Zones within 20 kilometers of the plant remain off-limits to most residents, and the scars of forced relocation linger in community after community. In the wake of that catastrophe, Japan's nuclear industry pledged a new era of transparency. Onagawa's operators now publish seawall heights and inspection logs. Tomari's upgrades are detailed in regulatory filings. Yet tonight, Rokusho's silence has left a gap. Watchdogs and local governments are keeping track, adding unanswered queries to a growing list. The question is not just whether safety systems performed as designed, but whether the public will be told promptly and in full what happened inside one of the country's most sensitive nuclear facilities. For now, the official record holds a blank space. The watch list for follow-up grows longer as the night goes on. Within minutes of the quake, the Prime Minister's office in Tokyo activated the National Emergency Task Force. Across government ministries, crisis teams assembled for round-the-clock coordination. Fighter jets launched from Misawa and Hayakuri air bases, sweeping over the Sanriku coast to assess damage and monitor for further threats. Maritime and air units moved into reconnaissance posture, with helicopters and patrol aircraft placed on high alert for search and rescue and tsunami assessment. In the Prime Minister's crisis cell, live feeds from self-defense force flights and regional command posts streamed in, feeding real-time updates into the national response. The machinery of state moved quickly. Every agency and asset focused on tracking the unfolding disaster, gathering data, and preparing for whatever came next. In these first hours, the government released only broad outlines of its response, holding back the granular details that would come with the morning light. Aftershocks ripple through the night, each tremor a reminder that the crisis is far from over. Seismologists warn that events of this size rarely come as single shocks. Aftershocks can continue for days, sometimes weeks, and occasionally reach magnitudes capable of causing fresh damage. Japan's position on the Pacific Ring of Fire means this is a reality, not an exception. The country endures nearly 20% of the world's earthquakes above magnitude 6, and a significant event strikes somewhere in Japan every 5 minutes on average. Community leaders urge caution, reminding evacuees that the ground's restlessness is not just a technical hazard, but a social one. Many hesitate to return home, aware that the next jolt could bring new risks. In this environment, transparency from authorities and ongoing vigilance are not just policy, they are a necessity for survival along one of the world's most volatile fault lines. Japan's shoreline remains on edge, its fate tied to tectonic inevitability and nuclear risk. With 20% of the world's major quakes striking here, every warning is a test of lessons learned since Fukushima. Tonight, as sirens echo and reactors stand watch, the world is reminded: resilience is not a destination, but a race against what nature may bring next. Stay safe, and let us know your thoughts below.